Welcome. We gather today to celebrate the 150th anniversary and to look to the future. We assembled here over 600 people representing over 140 universities and systems, 70 chancellors and presidents, 15 federal government agencies, several states, and at least 5 relatives of Senator Morrill. It's appropriate that we reflect upon the history and purposes of the Act, and we consider the application of those original ideas to our situation today. The Morrill Act was driven by 3 compelling ideas. The first idea was democracy and individual opportunity. And step by step, the country expanded these reinforcing concepts, beginning, of course, with the Declaration of Independence, but then including the election of Andrew Jackson in 1828, the economic success of many people from ordinary backgrounds, broad availability of elementary education, and more high school. It was a necessary expansion of democracy and opportunity to provide higher education for the sons and daughters of ordinary people. The second compelling idea was that the federal government had a role in economic development. From the beginning of the Republic, there was a debate about this idea. Recall the fight over Alexander Hamilton's National Bank and Hamilton's view of the assumption by the national government of state debt in order to establish the credit of the federal government. Later, Henry Clay, a Whig, had his American plan to tie the country together and to expand the economy, including federal monies to build canals, roads, and harbors. Fast forward, Henry Clay is dead, but Lincoln and Morrill were both former Whigs, admirers of Clay, and also advocates for the federal government investing in economic development, which by then included the Land Grant Act. The third compelling idea was to increase agricultural production. You saw Representative Morrill expand upon that extensively, and growth generally by increasing technical and scientific education. These ideas were aggressively advanced in the years leading up to the Civil War, but did not have all the critical pieces and support together. Indeed, when the Morrill Act was passed by Congress in the late 1850s, it was vetoed by then President Buchanan. However, when Lincoln had strong support, strong majorities in Congress, shortly after he came to office, for a broad economic growth and agenda and investment agenda. That agenda, of course, included the Morrill Act, as well as several other important pieces of legislation which Congress and Lincoln would later pass. The creation of the USDA, of the National Academies, the Transcontinental Railroad, and the Homestead Act. It's always been striking to me that Lincoln and these key leadership, even as they were fighting a terrible war in 1862, laid out plans for a future that only some of them could expect to be part of. And of course, Lincoln was not. The Morrill Act embodied all these compelling ideas that had shaped the Lincoln non-war agenda. Morrill was to expand democracy and opportunity by providing education and mobility for ordinary people's sons and daughters. The Morrill Act was federal action to encourage economic growth. There were pressing economic problems to be addressed. Yields in the East and other parts of the country were steadily falling. And people understood, again as Morrill described there, that scientific agriculture could increase yields. Also, many felt that more technical science education was important for a growing industrial country. Therefore, at the new land-grant colleges, scientific agriculture was to be taught, as was mechanical arts, which later became engineering, and moreover, humanities was to be taught to these non-elite students. The Morrill Act was the establishment of a university system, unlike had ever been established before, a system for the public purpose. The act was one of the most successful pieces of social legislation ever. The act was a democratization of higher education in this country. Early on, the land-grant colleges adopted a reinforcing model of cutting-edge teaching, discovery of new knowledge, and using knowledge to solve problems. This model of teaching, research, problem-solving was codified when the Morrill Act was extended to include research and the Hatch Act, with the Hatch Act, and the extension then with Smith-Lever. Also added were the historical black colleges in 1890 and later the Native American colleges. There are land-grant universities in all 50 states, D.C. and the territories. Moreover, the land-grant vision of economic opportunity has become a central part of all public higher education in this country. Land-grant and other public universities now have 7 million students, and they've increased enrollment by 23% over the last 10 years. Public universities do more than 60% of the federal research performed by universities. That 60% often surprises people. Research of public and private universities has together been critical for this country. It's estimated that at least half of the advancements of the United States gross domestic product since 1945 has come from technical discoveries from U.S. universities. I've just laid out the compelling ideas and needs that drove the passage of the Morrill Act and some of the important impact of this legislation in succeeding generations. I submit that those original ideas are today still pertinent and pressing. As in the 1860s, today we need to expand practical democracy through further economic and social opportunity for individuals. Consider the demographic changes occurring in our high school graduation classes. Public universities must respond with high quality and affordable education to our diverse and low-income population. Those commentators who argue that all students should not go to college really miss the point. And I would also note that most of those commentators have degrees themselves. It's not that everyone needs to go to college. It is that a lot more need to. Note the difference in income and opportunity between those who have a degree and those who do not. Note also that over 60% of the jobs by 2018 are expected to require at least some college education, and most of that degrees. Today, only 40% of the population have degrees. Also, the federal and state governments need to continue in the spirit of Lincoln, Morrill, and their successors to help create economic growth and to invest in new technology. Accordingly, federally funded research must be a priority to protect, even as the country makes the necessary budget cuts in the time ahead. Yes, public universities face severe challenges. It's true that public universities have been able to keep education costs per student down to about inflation for a long time. But education costs are generally covered by a combination of state appropriations and tuition. And unfortunately, state appropriations per student have declined dramatically. Therefore, the cost of education has shifted from the states to the students. A generation ago, states paid 2/3 of the cost while the students paid 1/3. Today, that figure is flipped, with the students paying 2/3. Nationally, tuition increases have roughly equaled the amount of per-student cuts in state appropriations. What we've done is we've moved from a public purpose to more and more of a private purpose in public education. Public universities know and are increasingly focused on retention and completion. They know that their mission must be to both provide quality education and research and also educate more students, with less money. These university leaders know that many, perhaps most of them, most of their university will be very different in 5 to 10 years. They also know that to achieve their mission, they need to renew the partnership with the states, continue support from the federal government, with closer collaboration with many others. Today, we will continue to think together about the future of the public universities. Bill Gates will open with some important views and questions. Secretary of Education Duncan, Secretary of Agriculture Vilsack will provide their insights about the future, as will a number of other people. It will be a stimulating day. Let me point out that each of you received, in coming in today, a volume of essays on the future of public universities. It was edited by Dan Fogel, former president of the University of Vermont, and funded by the Grant for the National Endowments for the Humanities. It's an interesting volume. I would next like to introduce Sterling Speirn, the president of the W.K.Kellogg Foundation. The foundation has been a critical supporter of public education for generations, and their extremely generous contributions have made today's event possible. Welcome, Sterling. It's good to have you here. And thank you for...
Thank you, Peter, and good morning to you all. It's exciting to be here, and it's an honor to be a sponsor of today's convocation. On behalf of the Board of Trustees and the staff of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, let me salute all the leaders who are here in the room today, all those around the country, and all those who have come before us, whether serving as president, staff, and faculty of public and land-grant universities, or great leaders in the state and federal governments who have all strived to carry on the traditions of the Morrill Act for the last 150 years. When I reflect on the history of the Morrill Act, it's clear to me that the roots of our institution at the Kellogg Foundation are deeply entwined with the roots of your institutions. In 1932, just 70 years after the act was passed, our founder, W.K.Kellogg, was just starting out his philanthropic career in earnest. And at that time, he made the remarkable gift of an 800-acre ranch in Southern California that would become the campus of Cal Poly Pomona. Along with that came his prized herd of Arabian horses that still to this day are at the center of that campus, which serves as a sort of central park for Southern California. Well, he did that because he fervently believed, as I know you all do, that education is clearly the best opportunity to improve one generation over another, as Peter just described. And he especially knew that that was important for children who didn't have as many opportunities as others, or who faced certain obstacles, whether it was because they lived in rural communities, or they had physical disabilities, or they were growing up in poverty, or they faced racial discrimination. We have tried to carry on that tradition of Mr. Kellogg, and we have consistently found that your institutions, across a wide array of projects, issues, and programs, have been our enduring partners in this work. So we've tried to continue that tradition that he started. In recent times, many of you are probably familiar with the work of a great group of leaders that led the Kellogg Commission starting in 1996 for 5 years on the future of public and land-grant universities. Out of that came the C. Peter McGrath Awards for Community Engagement, and I was pleased to see there are now vice presidents at your universities in charge of community engagement, because we do believe that it is changing the conditions in our communities that bring those emerging students to your doors and that you propel them to success. Now, I was startled, even though knowing this history, when I asked my staff to take a look and see how much the Kellogg Foundation had actually given and invested in higher education in just the last 25 years. And it came back to me that more than $2 billion has been invested in higher education, most of it to public and land-grant universities in just the last 25 years. So We just celebrated Mr. Kellogg's 150th anniversary since he was born in 1860 with a $42 million grant to Cal State Poly as the other bookend to that gift made a long time ago. But today is not about the past, and we appreciate the challenges that President Lincoln and Senator Morrill must have faced in 1862 in the midst of a civil war. Surely we can't say things are that bad, and yet we know things are very daunting and challenging today.